Good morning, everyone. I thought since we've been talking about the uncanny valley, it'd be fun to start off a little spooky today. So hopefully I look a little bit uncanny. Yeah, that's nice and spooky. Hope you had a nice weekend. Realized it was a long weekend, and then I realized that we didn't have a discussion section yesterday, and that made me very sad. We'll talk about why in a second. I'm not able to present all the information I usually am, so that makes me sad. Sad. There we go. Hopefully that's good and spooky. Let's see which ones are good here for Uncanny Valley. Oh, this looks good. Oh yeah, there we go. So it kind of looks like a real face, but not just enough. Yeah, that looks really nice. More scary faces. There's a good one. Yes. Let's see here. Yeah, oh, that's good. Yeah. Kind of doesn't look anything like my face, but it looks like a real face. Kind of, until you look closer. You can see the colors. Let's see what's our favorite one today. Which is the best uncanny face? Oh yeah, this one's great. Yeah, that is spooky. Oh yeah, that's great. Now you can see the mustache and beard, but look around the eyes. That really gives you the heebie-jeebies. Oh, you have no idea how much I'm enjoying this. This is great. Okay, a couple more. Let's see, another old face maybe. Yeah, that's spooky. Yeah, now around the mouth, you can see it's not quite right. And there's so many ways to make the face look just creepy enough for it to be uncanny. This one isn't bad right here until you open your mouth. Yeah, good. And then this is maybe not quite uncanny, but certainly entertaining. There we go. All right. I don't want to give you too many heebie-jeebies, but I thought we'd enjoy that this morning. Let's go ahead and start the material. Before we do, though, I would like to talk a little bit about what it means that we couldn't have discussion section yesterday. We were all set to have discussion section, and then we realized that, in fact, we had a holiday. So what that means, here, let me change the background too. Let me know if you get seasick from that. I thought that might be fun background, but let me know if it's too much motion. What it means, though, is that we're going to be missing some information, and I'm going to let you know whether or not we're going to have maybe something recorded for you guys to watch. And the issue is whether or not we're going to have enough questions for the final. So one thing we've decided to do is that we are going to use the final discussion section as a regular discussion section. We're not going to actually allot some time for review as we often do for the final discussion section. What we're going to do instead is actually have a review session for you. And that review session will be probably the Monday right before the exam. The exam's on Tuesday, and I can't remember the hours right now. We'll certainly get that information to you. So it's basically 2 weeks from today. Will be your final exam, and you'll have the oh right, you don't have hours, right? You can do an 80-minute period during that day, but that review session will probably be Monday during the day sometime, and it will be recorded and all that, so you will have a chance to see it even if you can't make the actual review session time. So hopefully that will work. Let's see, anything else? Looks like there's a question here. Let me see if we can deal with that. When I looked at you, I saw that you had Baby Yoda. Oh yeah. So I'm glad that we got to see Baby Yoda. So that is nice. Makes you happy. There's a lot of interesting Uncanny Valley examples in the Star Wars films, and there's been some discussion about whether or not kind of the reanimation of Carrie Fisher for Princess Leia actually was a successful instance of traversing the Uncanny Valley, or did people really kind of find her a little creepy? And we can talk about that in just a second. But let's go ahead and talk about the Uncanny Valley again. And we'll talk more about the exam as it comes up. We don't have to talk about that right now, right? Okay. So where did we leave off? We left off right here, talking about some really interesting cases of the uncanny valley. We started talking about, oops, sorry about this. We started talking about, oh shoot, all right. The uncanny valley in the context of movies, and two of the movies that we contrasted were the what we call Incredibles movie, which people find pretty charming, and the characters are pretty relatable because they're kind of kind of cartoony and caricatured, versus the Polar Express, which is just this really textbook example. Somebody said this is kind of the prime example, if you look up Uncanny Valley, that you'll be given. And I think it is probably one of the most conspicuous examples. So yeah, I think it's a great example. And then we talked about how hard it was to traverse the uncanny valley, how hard it was to make faces that could actually be compelling and not look creepy, like all those examples you saw in the beginning of class. And then I think I told you the story about this. When I was finishing the chapter, a movie came out that changed everything. And it was called The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, starring Brad Pitt. There you see him there, Brad Pitt. And as you can see in this still here, that he played a character that was whose at least face and body mostly grew from being old to growing young, and it's kind of a parable. It's kind of a kind of an interesting kind of philosophical sort of idea. It wasn't supposed to be science fiction-y or anything like that, but they really had to make him look old in the beginning, and then de-age him as the movie went through. And they realized that they were going to have to do an animated Brad Pitt. And so they ended up being successful. And there you can see Steve Pree, the person I interviewed, winning Oscars for the best visual effects of that year. Because for all intents and purposes, they believed, the Academy believed, that they had found a way to traverse the uncanny valley, which is really, really astonishing given how hard it's been. Not only for movies in the past, but movies very close to when Benjamin Button was made. In fact, Steve Pree had worked on a number of movies and commercials where they tried to make an animated character seem as real as possible, and he couldn't. He said it was just really, really hard. And so they said, okay, this time we're going to put tons of money, tons of people on this to see if we can really do it. And as the Academy kind of told him, they were successful. So how do they do it? Well, I'm going to show you a little video clip that's going to kind of portray how it was done. Actually, this is a video clip that was sent to the Academy members to show what type of work went into it. But I'm going to give you a little bit more of the story than the video is going to give you. So let me show it to you now. Hopefully it's going to come through well enough. Certainly parts of it will, to give you a general sense of how this works. So let me just make sure the sound's okay. And hopefully you'll get an idea of what they needed to do to allow this to traverse the uncanny valley. What if I told you I wasn't getting older, I was getting younger than everybody else? Oh, yeah, but I look a lot older. God bless you. And when I look back on it, it was miraculous. What if I told you I wasn't getting older, I was getting younger than everybody else?
You don't have a babysitter. That's what my mama. Are you sick?
Well, I heard Mom and Dizzy whisper they said I was gonna die soon, but maybe not.
Yeah. You're different than anybody I've ever met.
There were many changes. Some you could see, some you couldn't. Hair started growing in all sorts of places, along with other things. I felt pretty good, considering.
You've been on this earth however many years, and you've never had a woman.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Have a nice night.
Will you be here tomorrow?
Maybe next Sunday.
Make it real bad. Your hands. Painful. I was born with some form of disease. What kind of disease? I was born old. I'm sorry. No need to be. There's nothing wrong with old age. I enjoyed talking to you. I enjoyed drinking with you. Would you mind if, time to time, I stop by and say hello? Anytime. Good night, Mr.
I don't know how it's possible, but you seem to have more height up.
What if I told you that I wasn't getting older, but I was getting younger than everybody else?
Well, I feel sorry for you. You have to see everybody you love die before you do. It's an awful responsibility.
I never thought about life or death that way before.
So that gives you a sense of what the movie's like and also what the special effects were like. And it's a neat movie. It's a nice movie. So if you get a chance to rent it maybe this weekend with your family, I think everyone would enjoy it. But we're, of course, most interested in the technology. And I don't want it to be deceiving here. It kind of makes it look like a little bit as if they kind of did some motion capture of Brad Pitt and then just superimposed that into the movie. And it's not what they did. They realized that was not going to work. That's what they had done with Tom Hanks and the Polar Express. And they realized they needed more control over Brad Pitt's face to make it look like it was consistent with the body and the filming they had done of that small body before they added Brad Pitt. And so what they needed to do was actually build basically a Brad Pitt puppet. And what I mean by that is you saw him being filmed there, Brad Pitt, in the studio with all that stuff on his face. What they did is they filmed him making tons of different expressions, as many different expressions as they thought they would possibly need in the film. Reading his lines, but just to see how his face would change during those lines. They didn't actually then superimpose those clips into the movie at all. So they ended up having like a puppet that they could control any way they wanted. They could make the face, the animated puppet, smile, frown, look sad, look pensive, look excited. They could make it talk in any way they wanted to. Of course, they had to do it kind of very, very carefully. So Brad Pitt's face is never really seen in the first half of the movie at all. It's an animated, basically, animated puppet that they could use to create whatever they needed Brad Pitt to do, which was just amazing. I mean, they showed me, they had me sit down at a computer and they showed me all the things that now we can get him to say this. Now we can, they type something in. Now we can get him to smile and then look a little worried. and they just kind of plug something in, and it was just tremendous what they could do. And they had to kind of change all the nuances in order to make it fit into the film. It was really interesting. And then Steve started telling me about how kind of critical it was to get everything exactly right, so they didn't, induce this uncanny valley sort of experience that they did for Polar Express and so many other examples. And so what they would do is they realized it was important to have fresh eyes. What I mean by that is, as they were working on, the different motions that they could use for this puppet, they realized they would lose objectivity about how real it looked. So they would look at the image on the screen and say, boy, that looks really very convincing to us. But then they would bring in, people that weren't working on that movie, that maybe were working on another movie, maybe the staff, maybe the reception staff or something like that. They'd come into the screening room and they say, oh, that's still creepy. It's not working for me. And they ask what's creepy. And they say, well, the skin doesn't quite seem like real skin. Maybe in some of those examples I used before, the skin didn't quite seem right when I did the little camera tricks before when we started the class. And the same thing was occurring with Brad Pitt's face. So they'd go ahead and they'd correct that as much as they could, and then bring the staff back in who hadn't seen it for a while and say, okay, how's the skin look? Does it look real now? I said, well, your skin looks better, but now the eyes look creepy. And that was something they kept on noticing, that they would fix one thing and then something else would be noticeably wrong. And so it wasn't like, they could, just kind of assume that they were working towards something better because, one thing being fixed made something else look kind of would look like as if it stood out being creepy. And so it was this back and forth thing that took months and months and months of, kind of fine tuning. And this is something we know about the uncanny valley. There's kind of this all or none principle with the uncanny valley. Either you get everything pretty much perfect, or it's not going to work. And it's going to seem almost equally creepy whether you get the skin a little bit wrong and the eyes are good, or the eyes are a little bit wrong and the skin is good. You got to get it all to be a convincing animated character, or you're not going to get it at all. So it's either an all or none sort of thing. And he gave this great, great example. He said that the eyes are, in fact, the hardest thing to make compelling, to make convincing. So they had worked very hard to do whatever they could to make the skin right, and motion's also very difficult. And as you can imagine, motion would be difficult as there's so much in the movie with his facial expressions. That was a hard thing too. But then the eyes were so difficult. So what they ended up doing, because they were having such trouble with the eyes, is they took film. I think of Steve Prieg's eye moving just back and forth, like scanning a room. Like you saw Brad Pitt kind of looking up over that window, his character looking into the window and kind of moving back and forth, kind of scanning what was outside as he was looking through that window. That sort of motion, but just they just zoomed in on Steve Prieg's eyes, and then they took those videos of his eyes and projected it on a huge screen they had in the studio, in Steve's studio. I mean, it was like a 2-story screen, and it allowed them to see amazing detail in what eyes looked like when they moved. And as they watched it, they noticed something really kind of maybe, not particularly noticeable for us consciously, but something that was very consistent that had not been kind of reported before in animation. And that was this. As the eyes move to the left, they carry the moisture that covers the eyes in a different way than when they move to the right. So, you look into an eye, you're seeing the lubricating moisture that kind of covers the eye on the outside. Well, when the eye moves to the left, it kind of builds up the moisture more to the left side of the eye than to the right side of the eye. So there's a little bit more glimmer in the left side of the eye as the eye moves to the left. As it moves to the right, okay, it kind of spreads out that moisture, and then it collects on the right side of the eye. So now there's a tiny bit more glimmer on the right side of the eye than there is on the left side of the eye. And he said until they got that level of detail correct, could they build a convincing animation that would get rid of this uncanny valley sort of phenomena. You said that's, I mean, they were like things that they had to do for all the different dimensions. So the skin, its top layer actually is a little translucent, and so it allows light to go in just a little bit, and that had to be animated correctly. And then when they got that right, maybe they noticed the motion was incorrect. So it was that level of detail that they had to attend to in order to get a convincing Brad Pitt, but they did it. It was amazing. You know, it was perfect timing. It was one of my favorite interviews because I had scheduled the interview with Steve Preeg a month or so before the Academy Awards, but I then realized that the day I was scheduled to go was 2 days after the awards ceremony. They had just won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects and a history-making technological feat, which is to create a compelling, convincing animated character. So when I went in there, people were still partying. It was just great. They were so excited. And Steve said, I thought we were never going to be able to do this. I mean, you know, people would say, yeah, they did a good try, but it just looks a little weird still. But it didn't. They really were able to achieve this. And he was just on a high. He was, you know, he showed me the Oscars and everything. They were just so excited. It was really, really fun. And then he told me that the next movie they were working on, he said, I can't tell you much about this, but it's a movie that's kind of a follow-up to an old science fiction movie about somebody who goes into a computer, and it stars Jeff Bridges. And what they are doing is animating Jeff Bridges so he looks like his younger self, which is really, really interesting because if you know the movie I'm talking about, which is Tron, and I don't remember what the new version of Tron. Tron was a movie that was popular when I was a kid, and there was computer animation, but nothing like they tried for the new version of Tron. If you've seen that Jeff Bridges movie where he goes into a computer, you might know, in fact, that it doesn't look great. So what they were able to do with Brad Pitt, the Jeff Bridges that was reanimated didn't look, I think, very, very convincing, which was interesting because I, you know, after they kind of determined what the technological and kind of aesthetic goals had to be for the Uncanny Valley, you think they'd be able to apply it to other cases. But even though Benjamin Button wins, I mean, it is amazing what they do. I think all of us have seen many computer animated faces that have not looked great. Why? Why is that the case? So, you know, they did solve the Uncanny Valley for that movie, but they haven't solved it for good. It's still a big issue. Why is that the case? Well, it's the case because it turns out our brains as perceivers are amazingly sensitive to faces. There's probably no class of visual stimuli in the world that we ever come upon for which we are so sensitive. We are all face perceiving experts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the literature that shows that and why it might be the case and what our brains might be doing that make us experts. But the Uncanny Valley is just such a great illustration of that. And it's a really interesting kind of technological history too. So let me take a tiny little break here and see if we have any questions about the Uncanny Valley. And somebody has their sound on, so if you wouldn't mind, it would be great if you could just make sure your sound is off. I'm hearing somebody. But we have some questions, and let me see what people think of this Uncanny Valley. Aida says, Hollywood needs Uncanny Valley for horror movies. All the horror movies are not scary enough. Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of, I think a lot of people have gotten used to the scary parts of horror movies. So yeah, it's hard to make a scary movie now. Are clowns an example? Great question. So there's a lot of discussion about clowns and clowns makeup in Uncanny Valley literature. And it could very well be that for some people, certain clown faces are like that. You would think, well, clown faces are exaggerations or whatever. You know, they're kind of like caricatures of faces. But for a lot of people, I don't think their brains are interpreting it that way, and they are interpreting it kind of more as an uncanny valley sort of experience. And so I would not be surprised if the people that you know, maybe you're scared of clowns, maybe you have siblings that are scared of clowns. I certainly have friends that do not like clowns. By the way, I think the problem's getting worse. When I grew up, I saw a lot of clowns, because we go to circuses and they'd be on TV and stuff like that. But I'm finding that, since we're exposed to clowns less and less, people are finding them more and more scary. But I do think that's a nice example of an uncanny valley, at least for some people. It's interesting. Yeah, uncanny valley is a great in masks. So yes, sometimes just rubber masks on their own. Even if it's not supposed to be a scary mask, it's supposed to be a mask of a president or something like that. Yes, I think that is a good example, Aida. Let's see. Oh, you couldn't hear the movie? Who couldn't hear the movie? Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, hopefully, even if you didn't hear the movie, just a few of you tell me if you couldn't hear the movie. Yes or no? Could you hear? I couldn't hear it. Oh boy, I'm sorry. Shoot. Anyone else have trouble hearing it? That there's no. Okay, so I couldn't hear it. Oh boy, I'm sorry. A lot of people couldn't hear it. I'm not sure what's going on. Thank you for giving me that feedback. Okay, next time I'll make sure it's loud enough. But hopefully, was it just quiet or was it just completely inaudible? Could you just give me a quick little bit of feedback on that? Quiet or inaudible? Quiet. Okay, so some people say, okay, quiet. Okay, I'm very quiet. Okay, I'll make sure that's corrected the next time. Thank you very much. Okay, but let me go ahead and see if there's any other questions about Uncanny Valley. Yes, the movie is called Tron Legacy. Right, and it is, I mean, if you've seen the movie with Jeff Bridges, I can't remember when it came out now. It must have been 2015 or something like that, 14. The young Jeff Bridges, I don't think is that compelling. I don't think it looks all that good, which is kind of interesting given it's the same company, the same animator that did Benjamin Button, but there was something going on where they weren't able to achieve the same issue, the same goals. Yeah. Okay, Aida has a question that we're going to deal with later about specialization of face perception. That's a very good question, Aida. I'm not going to confuse things right now, but we'll get back to it, I promise. Okay, let's see if we can do a little polling question here very quickly. Okay, let's do a question on proxy touch. Okay, here's your question on proxy touch. Which of the following are examples of proxy touch? A, perceiving the gender of a fish through feeling it in the rod and line. B, John Bramblett's ability to determine paint color or its viscosity through the brush. And C, rats using their whiskers to navigate narrow passageways in the dark. Or D, all of the above. I think you're going to have no problem with this one. Go ahead and I'll give you a minute or so, depending on how you're getting it. Good. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're doing great. I don't think we'll take a full minute for this one. Great. Okay. That's pretty much everybody has responded. I think we're good here. Let me end the poll and share the results with you. Most of you, 90% of you got D, which is the correct answer. All these things are true. So we did talk about proxy touch being exemplified by the ability of, what's his name? PSYC. I can't remember his first name. The fisherman, the fly fisherman. Being able to field a whole bunch of detailed information from how the rod shook as the fish grabbed the line and started swimming, which was just amazing. And again, it's proxy touch because he's feeling something about an event out there in the world through the rod. John Bramblett's ability to feel the paint and its basically its color through its viscosity of oil paint, through the brush, how the viscosity of the paint resisted the motion of the brush. That could tell him something about the paint. Again, amazing. It's the way the vibrations and the motion of the brush as he's going back and forth through the paint are conveyed up to his fingers as a proxy tool. And of course, the example of whiskers, which actually is, as I said, a surprisingly popular topic in the animal literature, and that's an example of proxy touch, being able to feel the width of a hole, an opening that a mouse rat could feel through the vibrations on the whiskers as the whiskers ends touch the inner surface of the hole. There are no nerve endings throughout the whisker until you get to where the whisker touches the tongue. So for all intents and purposes, the whiskers are proxy touch tools. Okay, so the correct answer, of course, is D, all of the above. All right. Okay, some people are not seeing the poll, and I think that's just a sporadic problem. Anyone else have a problem? Can you see the poll? Yes or not? Yes or no, please? Can you guys tell me if you're seeing the poll? Yes, yes. Good. Okay. I'm sorry to Ari, who could not. I don't know what that's about, but you will be able, oh shoot. Well, certainly you can rewind and hear what the answers are and all that sort of thing. So that should be able to allow you to do it. Hey, one more question for you about the technology here. Is this getting you seasick? Should I change my background? I'm trying to, yes, it's getting you seasick. Uh-oh. I've been thinking that you're going to help me because, you know, I'm going to have to do this in the summer probably and the fall, the remote teaching. I've been thinking that quieter, kind of more scenic backgrounds are better. But now I'm wondering if maybe more exciting backgrounds are more engaging. It's fine. Yes, somebody, oh, a few people. Exciting background. You like the exciting backgrounds? Okay, it's kind of like I'm on a boat. I like this. Yeah, this is good. Holding on. There we go. This is fun. Okay, great. Okay, you guys like the exciting backgrounds. Star Wars, you liked? Oh, good. It's based on the subject, but not moving, relaxing backgrounds are good too. Okay, that's great. Thank you for the feedback. You know, you're kind of the test cases here, and I really appreciate the input to the technology here. Helps you stay focused. Excellent. This is really good. Okay, then I'm going to go for exciting new backgrounds with this class at least. Okay, let's go back to the class. Thank you so much for your input. I really do appreciate it. So why would faces be such an important class of stimuli? Remember, I just said that we are probably experts with no other class of stimuli more so than with faces. Why would this be the case? What is it about faces that is so important to us? And I think if you kind of take a step back and you think about faces as not just something we use to recognize our friends or whatever, but all the type of information in faces, you'll get an idea of what I mean here. There is nothing in our perceptual world that communicates information to us better than faces. We get more information more quickly than from faces than any other thing we encounter. Yeah, of course, we get information from the internet, Wikipedia, you know, television, books, all that sort of stuff. But in terms of efficiency of conveyance of information, there's nothing better than faces. Nothing communicates as efficiently as a face, okay? Of course, it's identity, right? So you can recognize spontaneously, if you know the face, you can recognize who the face is, right? But what else? Immediately, you can also understand intent. And what I mean here by intent is a person's emotion as they're conveying it to us. And that's another way of saying, what are they intending towards us? Are they intending maybe, you know, some sort of acceptance? If it's a happy face, maybe some sort of disgust if I've done something that's unappealing to them. If it's an angry face, is it something that I should be concerned about, as they might intend some sort of threat? And that, again, is conveyed so quickly, so efficiently, that nothing compares to faces in that way. What else? Fitness. And this is something you've discussed in your, oh, did you? Is this the one we missed? No, I think you did discuss this in your discussion sections about attractiveness. And attractiveness, at least to some degree, is an indicator about the reproductive fitness of somebody. So we actually did talk a little bit about this when we were discussing smell. We talked about the fact that uh, whatchamacallit, faces that are the same on both sides, okay? Symmetric faces are faces that are going to signal that a person has good genetic health, where an asymmetric face, of course, will signal that they might not. Um, and then attractiveness, youthfulness, all of these things can signal that they are a good potential mate for procreation, right? So that is something also that is conveyed spontaneously, as soon as we look at a face. And then we're not going to talk about this that much now, but we're going to see a very strong argument that we actually get language from faces. We all actually are using visible articulations from somebody when they are speaking, lip reading, even though we've never been trained to lip read or have much experience in formally lip reading. We are still getting linguistic language information from faces, as we'll see. Okay, so the reason why we are so attuned to faces, right? Of course, it serves this evolutionary purpose, such that all of this information, all of these different dimensions of who a person is, what they're intending towards us, whether they would make a good mate, and language and what that all entails, is available on a human face and is available immediately, which makes them such an important class of stimuli. Let's talk a little bit about this, a little bit about the literature that suggests this to us. It seems that we are hypersensitive to faces. And of course, you just learned that. So you just learned that this is the reason the uncanny valley has been such a difficult sort of problem to solve. Even after they solved it for Benjamin Button, they're still having problems solving it, right? For new movies. We are hypersensitive. We can pick out such detail on faces. And there's some great examples. There's tons of examples about this. Just one that I talk about in the book is the images of Mao that are in mainland China are all over the place. And people get very experienced with recognizing his face, such that research has shown that very, very small changes, in this case, the change is a change in the eye distance, how far his eyes are being depicted apart in this image, is something that people can pick up. And this difference here, actually, I don't know, I think I can see a little bit of a difference. Yeah, but this difference is minute. It is not something, this difference in the distance between the eyes, is not something you would notice if we were dealing with something that was not a facial image. But because it is a face, and it's a face that people have a lot of experience with in this case, it does seem that we do have a hypersensitivity in that way, okay? You probably know this, that you see faces everywhere. It's as if, when you see something that can even remotely look like a face, you interpret it as a face, right? So whether it's, mountain formations, images in cheese toast or whatever, cars, and I talk about in the book that people who design the exterior of cars are very aware that people interpret the front of cars at some level as a face. So depending on how they want to sell the car, whether they want to sell it as something that's a fun car or a serious car or an intimidating car, they will design the front with faces in mind. So a Miata is kind of a cute, fun car, and they'll make the face really kind of appealing, kind of young looking, as you see there. Faces and trees. All you need to do is jump on the internet and look for faces and objects, and it's amazing, the collection here. It's the faces and trees thing someone just alerted me to, so I just went and looked, and some of them are just amazing. I really like this one because it's got a personality too. I'm not sure I'd want to meet that tree in a dark forest, for an example. Okay. But here's the thing about faces. Not only are we sensitive, we are amazingly speedy with faces, okay? So we can recognize faces basically subliminally. And this is a term we saw before. Remember, we were talking about smell. We talked about subliminal perception. All this means here, it doesn't mean that coercion, as we know, doesn't mean that we can be, kind of coaxed into doing something we absolutely don't want to do. It just means that these are stimuli that are presented to us without our conscious awareness of exactly what we're looking at. And in this experiment I'm going to talk about, these faces are shown so fast to us that we're lucky if we even see a face, and in terms of conscious recognition of who the face is, we have no chance. Okay? But here was the task for people. People were asked to sit at a computer, look at the computer screen, and then they were told they were going to see faces one at a time, and they were supposed to push a button whether they think the face was famous or not famous. Okay, there's famous versus or there's famous two faces that were famous. Mick Jagger versus, is that Saddam Hussein? I can't see. Yeah, Saddam Hussein. And they were supposed to push a button if it was a famous or infamous or a not famous face. Famous person, not famous. I have the word infamous there for an important reason. But the goal, the task for the subjects was famous, not famous, not famous, that sort of thing. And these faces were coming so quickly. Again, they didn't recognize the faces consciously at all. Rarely did they actually see an image of a face. Okay? If anything, they say, I see a flash on the screen, but this is an impossible task. The experimenters say, we know it's tough. We know it's really something that you don't feel you can do, but do your best. Press a button when you think it's famous, and press another button when you think it's a non-famous person, just a regular picture we took off the internet or whatever. So people are looking and trying their hardest, but they can't even consciously see a face. But here's what the data showed. The data showed that, in fact, people were not great at saying whether a face was famous or infamous or not famous. What they were good at is categorizing a face as famous if it was a positive famous face. Mick Jagger, positive enough, right? I don't know why this example came up. I think it was the one used in the paper. But I think people like Mick Jagger, right? They think of him as a positive, kind of a positive celebrity, versus Saddam Hussein, who was obviously infamous. They categorized the, I guess, positive famous faces as being famous, and they categorized the negative famous faces as not being famous. So even though they weren't exactly accurate at saying famous versus not famous, they did seem to recognize these people subliminally, because they put the famous people if they were positive in the famous category, and the famous people if they were negative, like Saddam Hussein, in the non-famous category. It wasn't exactly the right response, but they are still showing sensitivity to who those people are, and also making kind of a value judgment on who those people are. Again, so quickly that they have no conscious awareness of what's going on. Again, they don't think they're seeing faces, but they are processing faces, and they're processing something about the meaning of those faces, which is so interesting. Now, this you're going to find really interesting too, I think. You may have heard about people who, through an accident or through some sort of illness, have trouble recognizing faces. These people are called prosopagnosics. Okay? And typically a prosopagnosia individual will show damage in a part of the brain called the fusiform gyrus down here. You don't need to worry about that at all. But for those of you that are interested in the brain, it's down here. Okay, I have a bad connection warning, but it went away, so I'm assuming this is okay. Anyway, prosopagnosia people are typically have damage in that part of their brain. There is a type of prosopagnosia that is genetic, and it's usually more subtle than that. But for people who have serious prosopagnosia, if you show them a picture of a face, they will not be able to say who that person is. They'll be able to say it's a face. You show them, for example, Mick Jagger, and they'll say, oh, okay, that's a face. I believe it's a man in this case. Yeah, he looks like a man now. He didn't always look like a guy, which was part of his appeal, I think, for a lot of people. But I don't know who that is, okay, even though they've seen that face again and again and again. Okay. Now, here's the interesting thing. Prosopagnostics, who we used to think really had damage in their face recognition area and it hurt their face recognition abilities, actually are able to recognize faces subliminally, meaning without their conscious awareness. So, you sit down a prosopagnostics who, has had trouble for years now after their brain injury, after their illness, recognizing faces. They'll tell you they use other types of cues, like they have to wait for the voice of the person, or depending on what clothes a person will be wearing, they'll then be able to recognize who that person is. They can't do very well at all with pictures, even if it's pictures of family members, even if it's pictures of themselves. They can't do a good job with pictures, okay? But the truth is, even though they're not consciously aware of who a face belongs to, they're unconsciously aware. Why? Because when you show a prosopagnostics a face that they should recognize, they'll say, I have no idea who that is, but they'll show a pronounced sweat response. Maybe you know about this from other classes. There's a way of measuring sweat on the skin called galvanic skin response. It's related to lie detection, that sort of thing, which only works so well. But it's sometimes a way of measuring unconscious, kind of subliminal sorts of responses in people. And if you show a prosopagnostics a face of somebody they know, okay, they'll say, I have no idea. Consciously, they don't know who it is. But unconsciously, they will seem to have some recognition as it's shown in a sweat response. And you don't even need to do anything that fancy. Okay, so you can do a very simple experiment where you just ask people to look at a face, but also, most importantly, read the name underneath the face. Okay, and so this will flash up, okay, very quickly. And the job of the subject is to say as quickly as possible what that name is. Just read the name as quickly as possible. Julia Roberts, okay? The timing, how quickly they will say that name, will depend on whether the name matches the face, if it's somebody they know, if it's a famous person. So, for example, if under Julia Roberts' face it had said something, I don't know, like Sandra Bullock or something like that, they would be slower at saying Sandra Bullock than they would Julia Roberts, because in this case, the face matches the name. They would then be asked, oh, do you know who that face is? And they say, nah, I can see a face. It's maybe a young woman, but I have no idea who that is. Consciously, they don't know who that is. Unconsciously, it seems like they do, because it sped up how quickly they could say the name. Okay? So even folks who we've long thought had no ability to recognize faces, their face processing is occurring. It's just kind of they don't have a conscious awareness of recognizing the face. They can't get the face to a conscious level, which is really interesting. So let's talk about the different ways that we're able to perceive faces and how it can be effective. All right. What I'd like to talk about first is facial expression. You've already gone through facial attractiveness, which is a really interesting story, as you know. But let's talk a little bit about facial expression. And you may have seen these images before at some point along the way. These are images of different expressions, and they're called the 7 cardinal or 7 kind of prototypic expressions. Whenever I look at these images, I have to say these are so clearly what we would call posed images, right? These are images of basically actors or people told to act out an expression. It is rare that we see expressions so exaggerated, right? I mean, when you're talking with your friends, how often do you see somebody make this expression for anger when they're really angry, right? Or surprise. How many times have you seen people really make that face when they're surprised, right? Real expressions are typically much more subtle than that, which is interesting because it suggests something important when you test facial expressions, right? Because there's this idea that there are some facial expressions that are universal. So whether you bring these pictures to Los Angeles or you bring these pictures to a rural part of Papua New Guinea, very different culture, not as westernized clearly as Los Angeles. are people around the world going to interpret these expressions as the same? And originally, they thought that there was a lot of cultural universality. But then as more research and research with more natural looking faces started being conducted, it seemed that there is some cultural universality, but not nearly as much as we assumed. And one of the reasons is a really interesting aspect of expression called display rules. And there's lots of ways that this is discussed. But I think culturally, it's maybe most obvious. I like to give the example as when I was in England for a semester, a quarter, as I was on sabbatical years ago. And most of the time I was in London. I was renting a place in London. I was going to London College for my sabbatical. And I remember being on the subway or the tube and looking around at people and smiling at them and watching them interact. And you would notice that the expressions were kind of very, they were polite, but they were constrained. I mean, think about if if you watch The Crown or you've seen, movies or videos of the royal family, they're very kind of constrained expressions. There's not a lot of broad smiling or broad concern. Things are very, very subtle, and that's how the expressions were in London. But then I took a tour around rural England and then into Scotland, and oh my gosh, the expressions were so different. Like when you meet somebody, the smiles were just like very, very exaggerated and kind of would take over a person's face. If there was concern, it would be so vivid on faces. And that's what display rules are. It's kind of they're kind of the rules that a kind of the culture kind of impose on facial expressions. Where in London things were much more constrained, in rural England things were much more exaggerated, much more broad, much more conspicuous, I guess we could say. And interestingly, there's some evidence, actually. I don't worry about this. I won't test you on it. But the strength of expression does differ between, say, London and rural England. It could be that the emotional range with which people will, identify themselves. People will describe themselves as, on a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate your emotional range during the day? It might be that people in London will give you a smaller range than people in rural England, okay? But there's some issues with that research, which I think we have to say it's inconclusive. But the expressions we know are different. Whether the emotional range follows that is something different. It's not. I don't know that literature well enough to really go on that. But you do find some cultural universality. And what you find, whether you're in London, rural England, Papua New Guinea, is that what we interpret as positive and negative emotions are probably consistent. So things like happiness, a smile is probably a smile, more or less, whether you're in London or rural England or Papua New Guinea or some rural village in Africa. When any of those people see a picture of somebody smiling, they will typically say it's a smile. And then when they see a picture like this, right here, this picture of disgust, they might say it's disgust, but they also might say it's anger or sadness, okay? Now, so what they won't say, it's happiness or happy surprise or something. So when you get within negative emotions, there are kind of, swaps here between, say, disgust and anger or disgust and sadness or something like that. Okay? That doesn't mean that people are going to be expressing that themselves in this way, but their interpretation of pictures can get a little, can swap here a little bit. But what is clear is that these are all negative emotions, right? So you would never know it. Very rarely would you find somebody in any place in the world saying that this is happiness or that this is happiness. Someone might say this is sadness, even though it looks to anger to us, but that would be within the negative emotions, okay? So it's that type of thing. All right. So there might be some cultural universality, but what's very, very clear is that it is something that we can perceive very, very quickly, very, very quickly. So we, in fact, can perceive them subliminally. We can perceive expressions, the expressions that we interpret depending on our kind of cultural context very, very quickly. Before I get into that, let me take a little break here and see if there's any questions on either the cultural universality stuff of emotion or the slide before, which had to do with prosopagnosia and that sort of thing. And we'll take a question. We'll look at a polling question as well. I just don't want people to get bored. So let's see. Okay. Okay, so Maria, okay, I'm sorry, but so it's called the fusiform face. It's called the fusiform face area, actually, and it's a part deep down there in the mid part. This is part of the cortex, but it's kind of deep down in there. Don't worry about that. You're not going to ask that on a test or anything. But if you're interested, I go into much more detail on some of the neurophysiology in the book. I think we all slowly say names when we're not sure if the name matches the face. That's interesting. Aida says, like, when we're trying to remember somebody's name, if we're sure we've met them, but we don't remember where we met them from. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Any questions about expressions or anything like that? Elisa asks, how do you think the subliminal face experiment would be affected by people like, oh, that's very interesting. Okay. So Elisa wants to know about people who are more controversial. So this is, I think, referring back to the experiment where people are asked for famous, not famous, but what they end up doing is putting famous and infamous into these two categories. What about people who are more controversial, like Louis C.K. Would be an example. I think some people, kind of think of him as a wonderful comedian, but, he's had his issues and with harassment and that sort of thing. So he's not considered an appealing character by many folks. Some people might see him as a famous comedian. Others would label him as infamous. That's a really good question. I don't know. And then actually, Elisa, your point that you make after that's really interesting too. You say maybe the effect is too small to maybe make that distinction. Yeah, it could very well be that there need to be extremes of people. So, pictures of Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, other people that are considered kind of universally negative characters for the most part, versus people who are more controversial. Maybe subjects would not have that famous, infamous sort of experience. I'm talking about individual subjects now. Clearly there would be, probably some swapping across different individuals. But that's a very interesting. So more complex, not so black and white sort of characters, good and bad sort of characters. What might that be like? It's a really interesting point. Okay, other questions about this? Other questions? Okay, let's do a poll question. All right. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the uncanny valley. Oh, it's going to be too easy, but all right, we can talk about it anyway. The uncanny valley phenomenon is A, more likely to occur with human forms, B, most likely to occur with faces, C, might be related to our natural tendencies to avoid corpses, remember corpses, or D, all of the above. And once again, it's going to be too easy, but there you go. Okay. All right, people are doing great with this. All right, so the uncanny valley phenomenon, I'm going to stop here. You guys got it. Most of you got it. Okay. The uncanny valley phenomenon is most likely to occur with human forms, most likely to occur with faces, might be related to natural tendency. Okay, so the correct answer is D. Not all you got it, so let me go ahead and explain a little bit. So yes, it isn't just faces as much as human faces. So that was a little bit tricky. So some of you, you're absolutely right about that. It is most likely to occur for faces, but there's more than just that one that's true. It is human forms, human faces. Okay, doesn't remember we gave that comparison that it doesn't work with the animated King Kong. You know, we seem to accept that much more readily. We accept talking dogs. You know, you see those on commercials a lot. I mean, we don't accept that they're talking, but we accept that they're not the uncanny valley sort of experience, right? So it is human forms. It is human faces most specifically. And it might also be related to our natural tendency to avoid corpses. That is absolutely correct as one of the answers. So the correct answer is D, remember? So it's one thing just to kind of give the parameters that induce the uncanny valley, but what about the eeriness? And we have to explain that somehow too, right? It's not just that, you know, the details of a face are going to set up the uncanny valley, which is completely true, but it's also, why do we have kind of like this ew sort of experience, right? Why do we have this kind of, you know, kind of disgusted kind of initial experience when we see a face like that it looks scary? And it is possibly related to our tendency to avoid things that look like they are bodies, human bodies, but aren't kind of naturally alive, which might be related to corpses. Corpses also give us that same feeling. So the correct answer is D. Okay. Somebody asked, Elisa asked about morticians, which is an interesting question. So are morticians less susceptible to it? Yeah, I would say so. And I think that's a great example of what Steve Krieg went through, and he was having to bring in, you know, naive or kind of fresh eyes to look at Brad Pitt's face, because, you know, after a while they became so used to seeing Brad Pitt in their animation, they didn't know when it looked creepy. So yeah, that must happen to morticians too. So the more you look at a creepy face, potentially, you know, after a matter of time, you'll get used to it and it won't be so creepy. Yeah, good point. In the experiment, subjects made guess whether they're famous. Is that right? Guess whether so you'd ask a question about the experiment where subjects are asked whether faces are not. Yeah, so the question in the experiment, the task for the subjects was to push a button for famous and not famous, famous, not famous. But what ended up happening is when they subliminally were presented a negative face, a face that had negative associations with it, they pushed not famous. Even though it was a famous person, they pushed not famous, as if they only wanted to put positive famous faces into the category. But the amazing thing is, again, they have no idea whose face it is, and most of them don't even know they're looking at faces. This is all done subliminally. Okay? Other questions about this before we continue? All right. Hey, you want to see something cool? Show and tell, right? This is called an udu. Okay? Why am I showing you an udu? Just kind of a little change of pace, so you know we don't bog you down too much. I know it's getting late in the quarter. I thought I'd show you one of the musical instruments. I like to collect musical instruments from all over the world. I think this is originally a Middle Eastern instrument, but this is kind of a westernized version of it. But what does it do? But it does some really cool things. Listen to this. Udu. Okay. Oh, you couldn't hear it? Oh no. No, you could hear it. Did you hear it? Please tell me you heard it. It was very quiet. Oh my gosh. Is this quiet? Oh, it blew out the mic? All right, good. Okay, can you hear me now? Did I break my mic? You can hear me. Okay. I blocked the mic. Oh, shoot. Well, trust me, an Udu's very cool. All right, let's go back and continue with our discussion. And what we were discussing here was, you know, what we were discussing here was the fact that we can subliminally perceive expressions, and these are kind of cool experiments. And again, the big picture here is that our brain can use faces so well, so efficiently, that we don't even need to use them on a conscious level. All this can be processed unconsciously, which is pretty darn cool. So in these experiments, here's what happened. Faces like these, probably now updated faces, maybe a little bit more realistic faces, are shown to people, but so quickly, like 1/50th of a second, that people are not even reporting seeing a face. Okay? In fact, faces are never even a word that's used in the experiment. Basically, people will say, okay, you're going to be judging the aesthetics of a figure. And I think in the original experiment, they were asked to judge the aesthetics of this character right here. This is like I don't know if this is a real Chinese character or what, but basically there were things like this. And these were shown to people that didn't know Chinese. They didn't know what that character was, but they were asked to judge the aesthetics. I mean, how pretty do you think it is? I mean, can you imagine, you know, that character being something that was on a painting you might put in your house? And they were shown different Chinese characters to rate the aesthetic, how much do you like the look of this sort of thing. And they told that was the purpose of the experiment. And they said, as you're watching this computer screen, you might see flashes every now and then, but just ignore those. We're really interested in how you see, how you judge the beauty of these different images, okay, of these different figures. Okay, what they didn't know is right before those Chinese characters were presented to them, okay, they had a subliminal presentation of a either happy face or a sad face. They didn't know that. Okay? In fact, they weren't conscious of that ever occurring. If anything, they say, I saw flashes, but no people even responded saying that I saw a face sometimes. That was not part of their conscious experience whatsoever. But if they were shown a happy face right before they saw that Chinese character, they'd be more likely to positively rate that Chinese character than if they saw a sad face right before the Chinese character, in which case they'd rate it less pretty. Okay? So the subliminal presentation of an expressive face influenced how they judged the character. Okay? It was subliminal in that it didn't have any, it didn't come into their consciousness whatsoever. There's other things too. Hypothetical decisions. I mean, this is interesting. This would be a different type of experiment where people might be shown a picture like this, maybe of a kind of a dark street at night, kind of with nobody else around, and the idea would be you would be given a scenario saying you're walking down the street and all of a sudden you hear footsteps behind you. It's late at night. There's nobody else around. Do you go to the other side of the street? Okay. Do you kind of try to avoid what might be something that could be a little aggressive or something like that? And people will say one thing or the other depending on their mood or their experience in life and stuff. But there can be an influence on that if they are shown subliminally either a smiling face or an angry face, which is really interesting. If they, in fact, are presented a subliminally presented angry face, they are more than likely to say that they will cross over to the other side of the street than if they're shown a smiling face. Again, they have no conscious awareness that a face is being presented. At the most, they'll say, I saw a flash every once in a while, but nothing else. And their reports will be totally influenced by what's coming to them from about the faces subliminally. And then finally, you'll find small but measurable mood differences. So you have people report their mood on a questionnaire. And before they see the questions about their mood one at a time, say, right now I feel happy on a scale from 1 to 10. What would you give it? 10 being very happy, 1 being not happy at all. Before each of those questions appear on a computer screen, a face is presented, but again, so quickly that nobody ever notices a face is there. And depending whether they see a happy face or a sad face, a small but measurable effect will occur on a person's self-rated mood. Now, again, These are very, very small effects. So on a scale from 1 to 10, how happy are you? Say, I'm having an okay day, 6, 7. Okay, if they see the happy face presented before they have to make that judgment, they might say 7. If they see the sad face presented before they make that judgment, they might say 6. And that might not be true for many, many people. They might not even get that effect, but it's measurable. So it is something that we can discuss a little bit, that we can say is real. Now, does that mean you should walk around and or go to the internet and just look at happy faces for a while? Well, it's an interesting question, and there are some ideas that maybe that does actually improve your mood a little bit. Whether it's sustainable is not quite clear. How much of an effect occurs is not quite clear, but I thought that we could talk. I should mention it to you a little bit. There is something very interesting and about faces and how we react to faces with our own mood, and it has to do with this. And I think this is one of the things that I found most surprising and potentially most interesting about the facial expression sort of literature. It's this. It has to do with imitation. And we are going to talk about imitation in some detail, probably starting next class, about how we are always imitating each other in terms of our body language and our speech and our language, real language and all that sort of stuff soon. But I wanted to talk about it with regard to faces first. Okay? When you look at a face, whether it is a smiling face or frowning face, your own face and its underlying muscles will be activated just a tiny bit to imitate that face, to imitate that person's face. Okay, so how do we know this? Well, you sit somebody down at a computer and you say, you're going to now be seeing faces. And in this first experiment, you'll be seeing the faces for a few seconds each, so it's all conscious. And your job is just to rate what you think the person's age is, and it's not a hard task for, most adults. But that's not actually what the experimenters are interested in. What they're interested in is what happens to a subject's face as they're watching other people's faces, some of which have expressions. So, for example, if a person is sitting down at a computer monitor, here, let me go ahead, and here they are sitting at a computer monitor, and the face they then see is a smiling face. So maybe something like this. Okay, up there, they see a smiling face, and their job, a conscious job, is to say how old that person is. Oh, I don't know, maybe early 20s, something like that. That's my best guess. Okay, but that's kind of not what's this about. What it is about is the fact that they are being filmed as they're making these judgments. And there you're seeing actually a picture of that person's response as they're pushing buttons to indicate that person's age. You can see they're making a subtle imitation of that person's expression. Okay, it's subtle. I mean, it is subtle. And sometimes you can see it by, filming the person, but other times you can't. There's a person now looking at a face of somebody who is frowning, so maybe, or angry, something like this. And you can see there's a very subtle lowering of the eyebrow, but it is something that's measurable. And as I said, it can be picked up by a camera sometimes, but sometimes it needs to be measured by something else. And there's a very simple way of measuring it. You can put like little kind of sticker electrodes that can measure muscle activity under the skin. It's not painful or anything like that. It's just little stickers with wires that you put around the face, and you have the person look at the pictures. And even if you can't now, as an experimenter, see the subject's face visibly changing, you can measure their muscle activity, and their muscle activity will follow subtly the muscle activity of somebody making the expression the person happens to be watching at the time. If a person sees a smiling face, even if you're not able to see the subject actually smile, you'll see muscle activity around the smile muscles. Around the smile muscles. If they then see a person frowning, again, this isn't something they're conscious of, they're just judging age, but they see somebody frowning, you'll see muscle activity in the muscles that involved with frowning, which is amazing. So it seems that, we talk about smiles being contagious, that smile and the whole world will smile back at you. On a very subtle level, it seems it's physiologically true, okay? It also works in the case of presenting subliminal faces. So remember, we've got another task here. Maybe people are asked to judge something about how pretty these things are or something like that, and the faces are presented to them really quickly, okay? That so they're unaware of the faces. They're unaware of seeing faces, let alone expressions. But they will show these very subtle imitative movements of their own face as they're looking at a smile or as they're looking at a frown. Again, they're not consciously looking at these things. They're presented too quickly. But the same sort of imitative reaction that occurs for faces when looking at a conscious face, okay, will occur when a person isn't even aware they're looking at a smiling or frowning face. Okay. Finally, there is some evidence, some subtle evidence that by this occurring, by the imitation occurring as we're looking at a happy or sad face or something like that, that there are, again, subtle influences on emotion. And we're going to see how this works later when we talk about imitation. And we're going to talk about experiments where imitation is actually inhibited, that imitation is something that is going to be stopped by simple ways, like just putting a pencil in somebody's mouth or having them hold a pen in their lips versus their teeth, that sort of thing. But we're going to see examples where that actually has an influence not only in their ability to perceive somebody else's emotion, but also to some degree have an influence over how they are experiencing their own emotion at the time. Okay, let me see how we're doing with time here. I got 2 minutes. Let me continue here. Oh no, this is a good point to stop. Let me just see if there's any questions very quickly. Looks like there might be in these 2 minutes. Oh, wow, people are asking some pretty things. Okay. Can we spot serial killers? Natalie is asking, and it's controversial. I think the literature is not clear on that. I don't think there's definitive evidence. I know that there are, there's been things on TV portraying people having an ability to spot liars based on micro expressions. I don't think the literature is on that. You'll see that's missing from the book, even though it's something that's often discussed on TV. I don't think the literature is clear on that at all. I don't think there's strong evidence for that. People are more or less sensitive to expressions, but to be able to detect a lie consistently, I don't see there's evidence of that. Okay. Oh, the Chinese character means sheep or animal. Thank you, Yumo. That's wonderful. Spring 20. Aaron wrote spring 2020. I'm not sure what that's about. Anyway, okay, we'll talk more about faces and amazing faces in face perception next class. But as you go around in the next few days, look at faces and all the information you're able to get from them. Okay, see you on Thursday.